Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big stuff. And today, we're tackling something that affects literally everyone in India, the union budget. We're going to dive into the 2026-27 numbers and figure out, where the money's actually going and what it all means for us.
So what's the big story with this budget? Well, you can really think of it as this incredible high-stakes balancing act. I mean, how do you pour money into building for the future without letting your debt just go through the roof? It's a tough one. So let's get into the government's grand plan for pulling it off.
All right, first things first. To really get what's going on here, we've got to look at the big idea, the core philosophy that's driving all these decisions.
And it all really boils down to this one concept you see here, the Sankalp. Think of it as the government's strategic promise. It's basically a three-part mission. 1, keep the economic engine running hot. 2, help people reach their aspirations. And 3, and this is crucial, make sure that growth is inclusive, that nobody gets left behind.
Okay, now this is probably the single biggest change in this year's budget. And it's not some new tax or a big spending program. No, it's a whole new mindset. They're shifting away from, obsessing over the deficit number for just this 1 year. Instead, they're playing the long game.
So what's this new approach called? It's the debt to GDP glide path. I know, it sounds a little jargony, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. Instead of a really sharp, sudden cut in borrowing, which could hurt the economy, they're aiming for a slow, steady descent. A glide path, right? And what that does is it gives them the breathing room, the flexibility to spend on really important projects right now, while still keeping their eye on the prize, getting the country's total debt down to a more manageable 50% of GDP by 2031.
Okay, so that's the big picture strategy. But how does that philosophy actually translate into cold, hard cash? Let's get into the numbers.
And the headline number here is, wow. It's a huge, record-breaking investment in what's called capex, or capital expenditure. Now, just to be clear, this isn't money for paying salaries or day-to-day bills. No, this is the budget for building stuff. We're talking roads, bridges, ports, all the critical assets that are literally going to power the economy for decades.
And right here, you can see that balancing act we talked about in action. It's pretty amazing, actually. Even with that massive spending on infrastructure, look at the key indicators. They're all trending downwards. The fiscal deficit, which is really just the gap between what the government earns and what it spends, it's slowly but surely shrinking. It's a clear signal that the plan is to stay in control, not lurch from crisis to crisis.
So it kind of begs the question, right? Where does all this money actually come from? Well, this chart breaks it down for us. The biggest piece of the pie, about a quarter of it, comes from borrowings. And after that, well, it's pretty much all about taxes, what you and I pay in income tax and what corporations pay.
And on the flip side, where does it all go? This is fascinating. Before a single rupee is spent on a new road or school, a huge chunk, over 40%, is already spoken for. A big slice goes to the states as their share of the taxes we all pay, and another huge piece goes just to pay the interest on the country's past debt. What's left over gets divided up between things like defense and all those central government schemes.
But a budget isn't just about balancing the books. It's also about making choices, about placing some really big bets on where you think future growth is going to come from. And this budget makes 3 of them. Let's break them down.
All right, bet number 1, the energy transition. The government is going all in on a future that is way cleaner and much more self-reliant when it comes to energy. And we're not just talking about putting up a few more solar panels here and there. No, this is about fundamentally re-engineering the entire energy system of the country.
And you can really see the scale of this bet when you look at the funding increases here. Now, I know what you're thinking. You see that massive 640% jump for the Ministry of Coal, and you're thinking, wait, isn't that a step backwards? But it's actually part of a really interesting dual strategy. The idea is to invest heavily in securing India's own energy resources, like coal for today, to keep the lights on, while at the very same time pouring money into the green technologies of tomorrow.
And this isn't just throwing money at the wall to see what sticks. These are really targeted investments. We're seeing huge funds for rooftop solar, big money for futuristic stuff like carbon capture, and a massive 10-fold increase in funding for battery storage, which is absolutely critical. And then there's the new Shanti Act. This is a big deal. It's opening the door for private companies to get into nuclear power for the very first time.
Okay, bet number 2. Modernizing infrastructure. The goal here is pretty simple, but it's massive in scale. Build the arteries, the veins, the absolute backbone of a modern economy that connects every single corner of the country.
And this involves some seriously ambitious projects. We're talking about 7 new high-speed rail corridors. The government's even calling them growth connectors.
The whole idea is to just completely change the game for how people and goods move across India, making everything faster, cheaper, and more efficient.
And that brings us to the third and final big bet, turning India into a global powerhouse for high-tech manufacturing.
Now, this is so much more than just building a few more factories. This is about securing the supply chains of the future. That's why you're seeing a second, bigger version of the India Semiconductor mission. It's why there's a huge push into biopharma, and it's why there's this new strategic focus on locking down rare earth minerals. You know, the stuff that's absolutely essential for making everything from your smartphone to an electric car.
Okay, so we've covered the grand plan, the fiscal math, the big bets on the future, but let's bring it back home. What does all of this actually mean for you, for your wallet?
Well, for most of us, the biggest news is there's no news. And that's actually the point. The government has made a very deliberate choice to go for stability this year. That means no changes to the personal income tax rates. The message they're sending is one of certainty, of predictability.
But there is one nice little change, especially if you're planning an overseas trip. You know that tax you have to pay up front on tour packages? The tax collected at source, or TCS? It used to be this kind of confusing mix of 5% and 20% slabs. Well, they've simplified the whole thing. It's now a much lower, much simpler flat rate of just 2%.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, this is really a budget of patience. It's a massive bet that investing in the country's foundations today will pay off way more than a quick fix tax cut or a handout. And that leaves us with a big lingering question, right? In a global economy that is just so volatile, is this steady, investment-focused, long-term approach going to be enough? Well, only time will tell. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.